The weekend we've been anticipating has come and gone. July 29th to the 31st of 2022 marked the occurrence of a special Anthro convention. A convention built on the idea of returning to the roots of the furry fandom, the AWOO Association's free-for-all. On social media, reception of the con consisted majorly of two separate groups. One side being those against the con for a multitude of reasons, some of which I touch upon in my previous video, while the other side of the con saw this as the perfect opportunity to dunk on the SJW woke moralists of the fandom. This side even consisted of those who were organizing the con, as the theme of anti-cancel culture was slapped on front of their advertisements and highlighted accordingly. From the varying hostility on both sides, it was clear to see why so many furries were watching this convention with a close eye. It would be a reputation battleground in a sense. A convention where we would see who cancels who.
Up yours.
So with one side awaiting the downfall of a con that practically boasted about their problematic casts, and the other taunting their opposition with their #uncancelable campaign, I believe it's safe to say that both sides of the spectrum were rather underwhelmed at the outcome of this convention. Nothing bonkers occurred at the fault of the con that would warrant online scrutiny, at least not until the end, but the convention itself offered a rather subpar experience. Free-for-all 2022 was nothing to write home about on its own. However, what you'd probably heard about the convention was in regards to its attendees and their sufficient moral deficiency, to put it lightly. This is what we'll be discussing in this video. Why I believe that Free-for-all as a convention was a forgettable publicity stunt turned hangout for the furry fandom's outcasts. A hangout that washes its hands of the acts their advertising and rhetoric played a hand in producing. Now, what do I mean by this? To touch on that, we'll have to look at what occurred during the 10-month span between the con and its announcement. What led to Free-for-all being held up as this pinnacle of everything wrong at a furry convention? Again, besides the attendees, we will get to that. But before we do, let's catch ourselves up to the weekend the convention occurred. So my first Free-for-all video was posted online on September 12th, 2021, 11 days following the initial announcement. Not even a week could pass without the con seeing a loss in their venue. On September 15th, it will be announced by the AWOO Association that they had been asked to relocate following the hotel's, quote, fear of the civil unrest threatened by those who want to see this event be cancelled. This is what I refer to when I say that Free-for-all's marketing strategy revolved around anti-cancel culture. They portray themselves as an entity that everyone in the fandom wants to cancel simply because, quote, humans today cannot tolerate different people, especially when they want to have a big fluffy event together. This is said without acknowledgement of individuals in favor of the convention, openly spouting harmful rhetoric and verbally harassing others based on their identities. This even including Peace Wolf, the woman at the head of it all. Not to say that the convention itself is primarily responsible for these acts, but to call out one side of the fence and turn an eye from the other will have your efforts seem disingenuous and biased. Which is why I find myself having to say I clearly don't condone sending threats to people you don't like over the internet, as some users online have rallied harassment campaigns against the venue ranging from constant phone calls asking the venue about their hosting of the convention, to making alleged bomb threats. Alleged because there appears to be no tangible proof of these specific threats. It should come without saying, obviously, but you'd have to be a special breed of fuckwit to threaten violence against someone online in this day and age, let alone actually go through with it. But we'll get to that soon. At this point, Free-for-all is simply an idea in the works. The brainchild of Peace Wolf after her removal from the Tails and Tornadoes FurCon staff for secretly placing a controversial friend as their guest of honor. This was her chance to make her own furry convention with blackjack and potentially homophobic hookers aplenty. A revenge con in every sense of the term. One that would find itself hosting a guest of honor with an alleged pedophile defending past, and an affiliation with the likes of Connie Lupine and the Furry Raiders. It should say something that these are the yes men backing Peace Wolf when it comes to her transgender rants. But we'll save that speech for when the convention actually occurs, because without a venue, the theory of this simply being a publicity stunt to own the left furry cancel mob was looking a bit more probable, something that would then be put to rest in the following month. On October 29th, the AWOO Association will post a video to announce the con's new location. With a new venue at the ready, it would appear Free For All was writing itself for the masses. We just had to wait a full pregnancy cycle. Fair enough. In those 9 months that passed, there was nothing of note concerning the convention itself. All that was given were convention updates, a continuation of their rally against the spooky cancel culture boogeyman, and a glimpse at their...
But hey, Free For All's gonna have a ball pit, so it all balances out in the end.
Veterans of the channel may remember that this was the only part of the convention I was looking forward to. And believe me, my critiques would have been a lot more scalding had they not kept their promise. Apart from the Furry Raiders declaring that they would be not only attending, but staffing the con, there were 2 incidents that occurred before the convention that I have to mention due to the people involved finding themselves affiliated with these supporters of this convention. Incidents that lack any semblance of humor we may find later down the line. So let's start with the first. On February 19th of 2021, there would be a BLM protest held after Amir Locke had been shot by police in Minneapolis earlier that month. This protest was held in Portland, Oregon, and it was here where 5 people would be shot by a man named Ben Smith, a man responsible for the death of a 60-year-old woman and the injuries of 4 others before getting shot and hospitalized himself. You're probably asking why I mentioned this individual. Well, Ben Smith here happens to be a furry. A baby fur, more specifically. The reason I mentioned him was due to his ties with Connie Lupine, a member of the unofficial Free For All Telegram chat group, who had ties with the con's head, Peace Wolf. This is someone who has shown a history of being openly anti-Semitic, and even expressing a desire for the far-right group Proud Boys to commit a mass shooting similar to the one he ended up doing himself. And just like Connie Lupine, he was found in the unofficial Telegram group mentioned prior, expressing the same vein of rhetoric as he did before. And since we've mentioned Connie and all this,
you can't keep getting away with it!
Connie was someone I mentioned in my previous free-for-all video due to his connection to Peace Wolf and the unofficial chat mentioned before. Connie Lupine has always been known in the fandom for what he and Peace Wolf have in common: the inability to accept a transgender person, metaphorically shitting himself at the idea of someone being trans, sometimes literally, because why the hell not? In the comments of my previous video, he could be found arguing about the legitimacy of being transgender. There were even Telegram chat groups where Connie was spreading terroristic calls to action, even advocating for the game ending of police. These messages coming from his channel of, quote, red pills and truth bombs. So you might be wondering if Connie attended, even though he wasn't too fond of how things were looking for the con. Well, about that, on July 28th, 2022, the day before the convention would start, Connie Lupine would be arrested for making terroristic threats towards state officials on Twitter. These threats were made towards multiple public officials who were advocating for abortion bans, a somewhat noble cause to fight for, regardless of his argument consisting of comparing gun rights to abortion rights. The man really loves his guns, what more can I say? Some of his allegedly having liquid gunpowder oozing from the muzzles. Allegedly. Again, the reason I mentioned these two is to give you the more extreme examples as to who supported this convention. No, they shouldn't represent the entire convention itself, but when these two are the crowd you pull in with this ad campaign of cancel culture stinky, and you don't even have the gall to acknowledge the connection and disavow their rhetoric, it does certainly say a lot about the character of who's running this thing, as if their past tweets didn't already. Now, as these are incidents that weren't headed by Free-for-All directly, not only would a response not be required, but it would be foolish of me to expect. Because you see, America's Anthro convention, Free-for-All, this convention wasn't a political convention, no. This convention was about returning to when furry was purely about escapism. They would even have a panel at the con titled No More Politics. When the convention's theme is centered around simply America, how could it be political? That lack of politics is exactly why the opening ceremony could properly cosplay as a C-SPAN broadcast.
You really think someone would do that?
July 29th marked the beginning of Free-for-All 2022. With registration at 9:30 and COVID restrictions non-existent, we can only pray for the safety of our little field reporter. Oh, right, registration. Well, Agent 47 was sighted pretty early in, as well as the Pussy Destroyer out of costume.
You've all just been subletting sex. You've been Airbnb-ing sex, but this is the owner of sex. And he's come to collect his keys from you.
Low blows aside, the convention start was an empty one, at least when compared to the hype that surrounded it. The opening ceremony would support an approximate head count of 83 people, this excluding staff. In terms of a con's opening year, it's definitely a lot more than expected, but it still resulted in one admittedly funny photo op after another. Although this day did have a bit of controversy to it. You see, the convention had a charity by the name of Safari Sanctuary, a private wildlife organization. An organization that happens to have a program by the name of Zoo2U, where you could pay to have exotic animals brought to an event for whatever reasons. For at least $100, you could have animals such as a tortoise or an albino python brought to your event along with a skilled handler, both of the animals mentioned attending free-for-all. As people were quick to notice online, the tortoise that was brought to this convention had a pretty jingly shell to them. Now, this was shown around online as animal abuse. Personally, I don't think this is the primary case, but I can certainly see where the correlation was drawn. I find it more probable that this injury was mainly due to the tortoise being a rescue, this possibly being the condition they found the tortoise in. But there is a possibility of malnutrition playing a factor here. A thing I've come to notice as this convention got coverage was that the actions of the charity itself were more intriguingly heinous than the actual convention. There's something about children with pain and other craft supplies around animals that makes me a little uneasy. As well as an accident back in 2019 where they allowed a photographer to go in the tiger cage and get nay-nayed during their stay. But I'm sure they've bettered themselves since the alligator pool parties of 2014. It's been 8 years, right? Let's just get back to the convention. The Fursuit Parade, a mandatory part of any furcon. Free-for-all being home to one of the shorter ones I've seen, lasting under a minute and consisting of a whopping 33 participants, some of which having a rather infamous history in the fandom that we'll get to, I promise. But first I have to stress the fact that looking for something interesting or fascinating at this convention, apart from the controversial figures that attended, was a fruitless venture. That's to say that the highlights or discussions of a convention shouldn't have to primarily be the controversy it breeds. A number of us online have talked the topic of big titty fursuits to death at the end of AntlerCon 2022, but I'd argue that wasn't the main highlight of the con for everyone there. Well, it was the Demon Core, obviously. What I'm saying is that controversy doesn't make for an entertaining or memorable convention experience. Because if you ask me to tell you what happened at the free-for-all variety show, I would tell you that I learned problematic furries seem to have a fetish for Bangarang. Not Skrillex, no. Just Bangarang. In reality, nothing outside of the furry convention norm occurred at the will of the con itself. Not even the hedgehog-hating guest of honor did anything too memorable.
How do you like that, Obama? I'm pissed.
To some, he seemed unprepared, appearing as if he didn't have enough material for the full time he was allotted.
How late is it? I'm checking. Want to begin? We got 2 minutes, right? Can I duck out 2 minutes early? Or do you want to come up here and say something or not? No? Okay. I'm trying to think of something else to talk about. I want to do the toaster one, but I can't remember it.
2 was announced as the headline guest of honor and hyped up by the website and staff for a little under a year. All of it leading to this very half-baked moment. This is the guy they said got cancelled because of his offensive brand of comedy and, not his shitty takes on pedophilia. Even with the website saying that it wasn't the place to be edgy, surely a comedian such as 2 would have been able to shape his act around that since the initial announcement of the con. Hell, even if he started the month after they received the new venue, that could have been enough time for him. I think this is one of the more interesting parts of the con itself, as I find it speaks volumes in regards to the free-for-all experience. That isn't to say that the convention went up in flames, mind you. Regardless of the convention failing to live up to the hype being brewed, it was a collected and organized ordeal that saw 207 registered attendees. The percentage of that 207 the con actually retained is up for debate. It is comforting that nothing hit the fan at this con, which brings up the question of why even cover the con in the first place. Well, I've been hyping up the reason for quite a while now, haven't I? Free-for-all itself, for the most part, had done what it set out to do. They got a venue, they held a sound convention for 3 days, they pissed off people online, as planned, and they introduced a few morally bankrupt relics of the fandom to its newer members. Just from the con group photo, you can probably see a few just from a glance, but for those who aren't aware, let me go through them somewhat quickly for you. Crusader Cat is a self-admitted Christian zoophile who surprisingly didn't base his Sona's hairstyle off of Dylan Roof. It's just that freaky a coincidence. Also just bad design. Along with his own admission of doing what Shane Dawson joked about and more, his online history is very shoddy, discovering the furry fandom through bestiality. It wasn't until he found out Christian furries existed that he would submerge himself in the fandom. His time here ranged from joining the Furry Raiders and proclaiming that furry Nazis aren't real, which, good job there buddy, it's not ironic coming from you at all, to getting banned from Fur Affinity after threatening legal action, because harassment of him and his Christian beliefs weren't being taken seriously. Not that Dragonair is in the clear here, as he would essentially extort $100 from Crusader to change his ban to a suspension, and asked that he kept low profile when he was let back on in this attempt to avoid too much drama. Diesel isn't as degenerative as Crusader, but he is about as unpleasant to deal with. With an online legacy consisting primarily of conservative politics and ejaculating in footwear, he's the unironic culmination of Bidoof's Law. You know, the one where you say something online that's highly problematic and then go on to talk about something sexual? That's Diesel for you. Another attendee who falls into this category would be Aviator Nova is another victim of Bidoof's Law, as well as the head of the Furry Raiders podcast. Besides his own shitty political takes, sprinkled with foot-tickling fetish art, nothing really stands out about him other than his affiliation with the Furry Raiders leader and serial false flagger Foxler Nightfire, as well as his attempt to insult my content so that I would interview him for a video. Because I have that fragile an ego, I guess. I mean, if you're gonna insult me constantly, you could at least buy me dinner first. That's kind of a given, don't you think? Although he was gracious enough to debunk someone's statement that Foxler had crashed the convention just to photobomb the group and leave, saying that he instead received a warm reception. But that isn't much of a kudos when people online can't even keep their own falsehoods in check. Oh dear lord, where do I begin? As Jason and Kabir both have extensive histories in the fandom, there is an extensive log of horrid things they've been up to. One of my past videos covering a sizable fraction of the whole. Arguably the worst to come from the duo would be a bestiality comic, a not safe work animation that used Kabir's voice when she was 16, and their hour-long beratement of a past roommate the moment he even suggested they pay rent during their stay. Arguably the worst of the bunch here, but there is one more that's a close second. Most who know of Magnus know him for his Confederate flag-themed fursuit named Arkansas, a suit that got him banned from Midwest Fur Fest in 2015, and from Anthrocon in 2017. For the latter, however, the suit simply got him a slap on the wrist, staff asking that he not wear it there again. It wasn't until they found out that he hadn't paid for entry that he was banned from attending until payment was made. His more heinous actions would be that associated with Midwest Fur Fest 2017, as well as the existence of the fursuits he's made. At MFF 2017, he would allegedly be arrested when he tried to ghost the con wearing a different fursuit with a German-style helmet, supposedly saying a Nazi salute during this attendance. He would be asked to leave, instead being taken into police custody later that night. He was a pretty decent fursuit maker, decent being used a bit loosely here. It's just a shame that the fursuits he makes are either done just to provoke reactions or rip off furries that are more well received than himself. At Free-for-all, you can see Magnus in both the Confederate fursuit, as well as a suit that ripped off the design of a Braxton Doggo. However, one of the more infamous ones he's made would be a ripoff of Lemonade Coyote's suit, a suit he started work on solely due to their recent passing. So with a cast of supporters like these, I'm sure you can see where the controversy with this con is coming from. It's also the reason why I consider the con itself to be a forgettable publicity stunt. I believe this comment put it the best when they say, "Everyone expected a dumpster fire, but we just ended up with a dumpster." The thing is, even with Free-for-all doing what it's set out to do, Any outrage or coverage concerning the event itself is most likely to die out within a month of its occurrence, if not sooner. That's a lot shorter than what can be said for the attendees themselves. They've gained their share of supporters and critics, and based on what you've seen, I'm sure you can tell the mindset behind both of those groups. The lesser known people who are verbal about attending the con are destined to see backlash for their decisions, regardless of my disapproval for harassing people. Any mention of the con after its relevance will be due to the reputations of the attendees and staff. To put it simply, Free For All is just a revenge con. And as most plans for revenge go, they're built and fueled by spite and controversy. Which is why Jason FX and Kabir have already been announced as the guests of honor for Free For All 2023. For those familiar with their track records, this seems like it will be done solely to piss people off. That's because it is. It's supposed to get a reaction from people. People are supposed to be vocal about it because to the staff, all publicity is good publicity. It's why they're so vocal about cancel culture and being #uncancelable. It's because that's all they really have in terms of appeal. Acting as a refuge for those who've lost favor in the public eye due to any amount of stupid decisions they've made in their lives and posted online. They're a convention for the furry fandom rejects. That's the purpose that was projected by this weekend. And the way that purpose is catered to is through pandering to their audience of the cancelled, the controversial, and the problematic. Take that controversy away from this year's convention and what do you have? Just a subpar furry convention, struggling to get its footing. With the ball pit, of course, but I'm sure our favorite little guy came out of this ordeal just fine.
He's dead. His blood is on my hands. Someone has to tell his family. I failed you, soldier!